You're listening to the official Reformed Stoic podcast, covering politics, philosophy, theology, conspiracy theories. I'm ready to get to the bottom of this life. Are you? Join Wolfgang, Sketty Squad, Purity Gang, as we strive to take dominion over this dying planet. I am Reformed Stoic, and this is my podcast. Let's get it. I started making green tea like dangerously close to the beginning of the stream. Gives myself a rush. Be preoccupied with things right up until the stream starts. I took the cats outside to play. Got back in a few minutes before we got here. Woo! Playing with fire, baby. Playing with fire, but we got some green tea. I ate a couple of pieces of toast. Made sure that I'm all good to go, baby. I pretty much just eat food so that the green tea doesn't make me sick. Let's get it and get it. All right, my friends. Well, today I decided that we're going to learn a little bit about where the establishment is at with health. How are the talking heads telling us to eat? What are they saying is healthy? A little bit about the obesity epidemic. Let's get it together, guys. Let's try to get a little bit healthier. We're going to learn a little bit about Fetty. Never forgetty. The epidemic of the Fenty. It's truly, not funny, you know. I actually know some people who have passed from fentanyl. It's pretty deadly stuff. Let's try to approach the topic respectfully, see what's going on. And then we're going to watch a couple of videos about the church fathers. So, life is good over here. I want this podcast to not be so entirely doom and gloom. You know, I feel like a recurring theme here is like everything that's wrong with the world. We're talking about everything that's wrong with the world. So, a little bit more positive today, you know, just going over some diets. It's not necessarily negative. Fentanyl, pretty negative. I think the religious section is starting to really make a comeback. I'm dialing it down a little bit, you know. I don't want to start off with too much, bore people to death with theology. Maybe throw on like 20 minutes at the end of the stream and you're like, oh, just 20 minutes? I wanted to learn more about the church fathers. Come on, man. I want to learn more about Jesus. Kind of leaving you hanging a little bit, leaving you a little bit wanting for more. So I started watching Dragon Ball Z. Yo, so this DVD set that I got, it has a feature called Marathon Feature. And all that it does is it takes out the intro at the beginning of episodes. Like, it plays one intro when you start the marathon, but then when it goes to episodes, it just seamlessly goes to the next episode. No, no introduction song, no what happened last time. It's so smooth, bro. This is the best way to watch Dragon Ball Z. Last time I watched it on my laptop. It's good living. So a little bit about what we do here, guys. I pretty much just pull up clips that we're allowed to watch here, articles. I just kind of gather some information and just kind of put together a little low-effort show for you, man. Sometimes I have lots of commentary. Sometimes I don't. But I'd like to think it's entertaining either way. And if it does end up being a segment where we literally just watch other people's content and I'm in silence, as long as I'm allowed to do that, which I always am, I think it's entertaining. And the main goal around here is for you guys to be entertained, not necessarily for me to be like, whoa, look how hard I'm looking, look how much I'm talking. Anyway, can we news it? News it? You're listening to the Reformed Stoic News segment. Let's go! Let's get have a certain level of IQ to appreciate this show. Alrighty, let me just take a little sip. Look at me, look at me, look at me. I see you, buddy. Let's smear it. Okay. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? I'm going to take some sips. I like starting with the videos, man. And then, you know, once we got a little momentum going, then I get to the articles. That's the way to go. Let's get cozy.
Is there such a thing as the perfect diet? The right combination of nutrients? It is one of the most popular Google searches, and one name has cropped up time and again. The Mediterranean diet. It is being talked about for its benefits for good heart health. In tackling diabetes, it is also touted as a sustainable diet for weight loss. In our segment, The Good Life today, let's break down this diet for you.
Let's diet it. Let's get cozy. Let's make it happen for a better tomorrow. Nice little collab there.
What's the best diet for you? One that is sustainable and rich in nutrients. Several contenders have tried to stand the test of time, but they've all been fleeting trends, be it keto, paleo, Atkins, Whole30, the list goes on. But one particular diet is emerging as the best, most sustainable option to live a long, healthy life. And no, it's not some miracle superfood or fad. The Mediterranean diet. It's a way of eating based on the traditional cuisines of Greece, Italy, and other regions, which border the Mediterranean Sea. It includes eating plant-based foods, whole grains, vegetables, legumes, fruits, nuts and seeds, alongside herbs and spices. And olive oil should be your main source of added fat. What about protein? Well, you're advised to eat fish.
Actually, I've heard that you have to be very selective with olive oil. Like, when you see a really good deal, like, oh, a gallon of extra virgin olive oil for $10. Wow, what a great deal. It's usually not even, like, real olive oil. There's people who dive deep into this. There's a lot of deceptive marketing these days. And, you know, when you see, like, the fancy, smaller bottle of olive oil and it's more expensive and it looks fancier, you pretty much have to make sure you get that if you want real olive oil, bro, because there's an olive oil hustle out there these days. So careful when pursuing your olive oil. By the way, coconut oil, a lot of people swear by that too. So let's oil it.
Fish, seafood, dairy, and poultry in moderation. And red meat and sugar can be had occasionally. There is no magic ingredient, no secret sauce, no set rules for recipes, no hard-to-find superfood here. Essentially, it is a diet comprising all those nutrient-rich foods which our ancestors have been consuming for generations. Moderation is key in consuming your favorite treats, and prioritizing nutrition over restrictive eating is the only mantra. All these factors have made the Mediterranean diet sustainable. Speak to your nutritionist. They'll probably give you a similar diet with varying portions for weight loss. Speak to your doctor for underlying health issues, and he or she may take away a few items and add some others for a healthy diet. Whatever the permutation and combination, a Mediterranean diet has stuck around amid fads because of its flexibility. Allergic to fish? Cut it out. Don't like meat? Stick to plant-based sources of nutrition.
Why do I feel like I still don't know what the Mediterranean diet is? I'll have to see what the comments say about this one.
The benefits of this diet are not just restricted to weight loss. Experts say it reduces the risk of heart disease and stroke by lowering cholesterol. It helps you hold on to muscle strength as you age. It may even reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes by maintaining healthy blood sugar levels. And perhaps the biggest USP of this diet is that meals are built around easily accessible elements hiding in your fridge. There is no restriction, but only moderation.
So basically just like regular food, like, I don't know, it just looks like a bunch of random food, like vegetables and berries and milk and just kind of like random, like healthy stuff. What exactly makes the Mediterranean diet the Mediterranean diet? I'm a little confused here.
What makes this diet so popular is not heavy marketing.
So salad and vegetables and fruits and just kind of like healthy stuff.
Or false promises. This isn't some get thin quick diet that promises drastic transformation. It is all about making small but significant changes to your eating patterns for a longer, healthier life. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
WION now available in your country. Download.
Okay, let's see if the comments can help us out here. Eat what is grown and produced locally. Be a part of your ecosystem and save and protect it. You know, I'm down with that, dude. I kind of care about the environment. You see, this is an important distinction for people to make. Good opportunity for me to give my 2 cents here. There's the whole green gases, cow farts, carbon emission, global warming, caring for the environment. And then there's like, hey, let's try to like not let fish get their gills stuck in Coca-Cola garbage. Like, let's get garbage out of the oceans. Let's like, make sure that like moose and deer don't look all sad and confused when there's like garbage everywhere, like let's like the OG taking care of the planet, not like in ways that we can't really see, just like being good to the environment, baby. And yeah, supporting local if you can. What ends up happening is that supporting local ends up being more expensive, and then we hit a recession and times get hard like they are now, and then everybody panics, and then the line is out into the freaking street for McDonald's like I saw yesterday. It was freaking chaos. There's like little kids like playing in the freaking drive-thru. It's like, wow, everybody's going to McDonald's when times are hard. I wonder how mom and pops are doing. So I support eat what is grown and produced locally. That would be ideal, my friends. Because of the economic crisis that always comes up, the best thing to be on every wise individual's mind or list is to invest in different streams of income. Okay, then. Being the only person who can afford internet connection in my village, I know it's a big scam. Nothing is healthier than the tasty UN food rations. Mediterranean food. Quality meal. I feel like we need to get a better summary of the Mediterranean diet. I'm a little confused. Mediterranean diet. Let's see if some Chad just like summarizes it very quickly. The Mediterranean diet, pros and cons. Sure, this is short. Let's try it.
The Mediterranean diet is so important from a research perspective because, first of all, it was done on a large study. There are about 7,000 participants in Spain. It also looked at primary endpoints. That's heart disease, stroke, and mortality from heart disease and stroke, and not just intermediate outcomes like blood pressure, weight, or cholesterol levels. And the other interesting thing was that they had to stop the study after 5 years because they saw such dramatic results, a 30% reduction in the endpoints, particularly in death from stroke. One important part of the study is that the control participants were asked to follow a low-fat diet, but they didn't necessarily do so. And there are several reasons. In the beginning of the first 3 years of the study, they were just given leaflets instructing them on how to follow a low-fat diet, but they didn't really know how to do it. Midway in the study, the investigators decided to give more intensive classes and contact with the participants. So they were able to go from about 39% of calories from fat to 37%, but that's really not a low-fat diet. A low-fat diet, according to the American Heart Association, is less than 30% of calories from fat. The fact that the control group was not following a low-fat diet.
So I'm getting the idea that it's kind of in line with what I see bodybuilders usually do: lower fat, higher quality fat, and just protein and carbs. I mean, that is what I see in bodybuilding. I don't see a lot of keto. It's lots of white rice, lots of pasta, lots of oatmeal, and then for your protein, lots of lean chicken breasts, chicken this and that. Maybe a little olive oil for your fats, or some eggs, lots of egg whites. High protein, high carb, low fat. That's what I'm assuming here from what I've seen.
Means that the Mediterranean diet was just compared to a usual unhealthy diet. When people see the media reports of the study, and if they are on a low-fat diet, they might want to abandon a low-fat diet. It is actually premature to do that because this was not really a study that looked at participants who were following a low-fat diet. They were just assigned to a low-fat diet, so really should await further research.
You're basically either going to be cutting carbs or you're going to be cutting fat. And yeah, for me, I feel like I end up trying to cut fat. That just seems to work better for me. Keto, I was like shrinking, and a lot of people say you're just not getting enough fat when you do keto because people are hesitant to eat that much fat.
Results.
It's from an accredited medical school. Yeah, like forever ago. This diet has helped me fight off so much inflammation and lethargy. See, that's what people say about keto, too. Like, you know, guys, I feel like there's not one size fits all with diets. I think different people need different things, and you just got to see what works for you. But then there's overall, like, universally not eating fast food, cutting out the GMOs and the salty, processed crap, frozen food. That's pretty universal, however you eat, trying to cut that shit out. The key is to not be afraid of eating good carbs and good fresh sources of protein. See, that's what I'm talking about. Carbs and protein, baby. I got it. Fish, healthy fats in fish, omega-3s, beans, or other protein sources that isn't red meat. Aha. I kind of like red meat. That's just me. That's just a lot of people. High test. Red meat. Good. And I get the 85%, baby, or 80%. You want some fat in that shit. You want some fat in there. But overall, this is a low-fat diet. So, yeah, there's some fat in red meat. For those who eat red meat, I would say be careful how much of it you're consuming on a weekly basis. And, you know, I don't eat red meat every day. I find it expensive and tiresome to eat red meat every day. So, like maybe once or twice a week, I'll make my ground beef and macaroni and cheese with veggies dish with the garlic in it. So, yeah, I think I kind of agree with this person's sentiment. Like, get some red meat in there, but, you know, a lot of people out there eating red meat every day. That might not be ideal for everyone, especially if you're trying to have six-pack abs. McDonald's cheeseburger. You know, that pizza last night was like, I feel like pizza's worse for you than McDonald's. I still want that McDonald's, baby. But everybody loves McDonald's here. The fact that the low-fat group struggled to comply implies that the low-fat diet is difficult to follow. This by itself is a significant strike against the low-fat diet. Or maybe people just lack discipline. In my experience, on keto, you kind of get bored. Like, I find it more flavorful to be able to have lots of carbs, you know, lots of potatoes and whatnot. I just found myself on keto eating like a lot of ground beef with veggies and olive oil in it. And it's like, this kind of gets old. So I personally like the carbs. Anyway, let's take a look at where we're at. July 26, 2022. Hot off the press 2 days ago. What's happening with the obesity epidemic? Just a couple minutes. Just a quick little message from our sponsors here. Or not really. Just like just a Spider-Man PSA.
There's an epidemic weighing down our nation, contributing to more than 12% of yearly deaths in the U.S. No, it's not COVID-19. That's a pandemic. What we're talking about is a long-standing chronic health problem, and it doesn't look to be going anywhere anytime soon. This is the obesity epidemic. More than 40% of Americans fit the medical definition for having obesity. This puts them at risk for serious health issues, including diabetes, heart disease, and some types of cancer. And the pandemic has only increased the stakes. In its first year, nearly 1/3 of severe COVID cases were blamed on excess weight. So how come obesity, with its many associated risks, is so difficult to overcome? Is it societal, brought on by a culture of laziness? Or is it biological, and we're just putting too much of the blame on ourselves? Societal circumstances are certainly a factor. With the prevalence of ultra-processed and aggressively marketed foods that are high in fat, salt, and sugar, it's easy to see why we put on the pounds in the first place. But getting them off is a lot harder, and this is linked to our evolutionary biology. Once the human body creates extra fat cells, it's extremely difficult to cut down their numbers. We evolved to hold on to extra pounds, ensuring our survival when food was scarce. Our evolution has yet to catch up with the existence of a fast food joint on every street corner. To make matters worse, experts have found that social pressures around weight loss often cause those who do lose weight to rebound. Stigmas and shame are more likely to create negative emotions and disordered eating, which result in weight gain instead of positive shifts in health and eating habits. So, if you've been having trouble losing weight recently, don't be too hard on yourself. It's just in our nature.
Oh, I like the way that bass line came in. That was like a tempo change. That's a cool little song there. Get healthy. All right. Comments. I'm going to guess it's caused by food. Ooh, this guy has got a lot to say here. The whole period of 30 years of the country's independence, Kublev family robbed businesses, people. All right, you know what? Just forget this guy. What caused it, and why is it so hard to cure? Overeating and no exercise. Bam! Just save you $1 billion in studies. Where's my Nobel Prize? Is it rocket science, people? I'll tell you what. Like, if you're out there running, jump roping, hiking, going for walks, working out. I'm still just doing my home workouts. I did a back workout today. I did a bunch of sets of really clean body weight rows. Picked up the 30-pound dumbbells. Did some rows with that for a few sets. Did a few sets of drop set curls. Hit some traps. You know what I'm saying, man? I'm out here just living it a little bit. You know, doing my thing. Just work out, eat healthy, and, you know, you'll be all right. The American Heart Association Diet and Lifestyle Recommendations. All right, this is short, guys. This is going to be a short section today. And then we're going to watch this 15-minute news coverage of fentanyl that was done in April 18th, 2022. Starting with our boy, Mac Miller. Man, he passed away at 26. Yeah, some of these rappers who are popping these pills, do the Molly, pop the Xanny, da-da, those guys are like dying at 24 and 25, dude. It's ridiculous. A healthy diet and lifestyle are the keys to preventing and managing cardiovascular disease. It's not as hard as you may think. Remember, it's the overall pattern of your choices that counts. Make the simple steps below. Use up at least as many calories as you can take in. Start by knowing how many calories you should be eating and drinking to maintain your weight. Nutrition and calorie information on food labels is typically based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet. You may need fewer or more calories depending on several factors, including age, gender, and level of physical activity. Increase the amount and intensity of your physical activity to burn more calories. Aim for at least 150 minutes of moderate physical activity, or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity, or an equal combination of both each week. Regular physical activity can help you maintain your weight, keep off weight that you lose, and reach physical and cardiovascular fitness. Yeah! Eat an overall healthy dietary pattern that emphasizes a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and products made up mostly of whole grains. Ha! Whole grains, yeah. It's like the food pyramid. People roast that all the time. Healthy sources of protein, liquid, non-tropical vegetable oils. Okay. Minimally processed foods, minimized intake of added sugars, foods prepared with little or no salt, limited or preferably no alcohol intake. This is all pretty basic, isn't it? Apply this guidance wherever food is prepared or consumed. Live tobacco-free. Don't smoke, vape, or use tobacco or nicotine products, and avoid secondhand smoke or vapors. So basically, anytime somebody's smoking next to you, you need to like tackle them like you're in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, dude. Get down! Get that cigarette away from me. Okay, well, pretty basic stuff, guys. Be healthy. Wink. Moving on to fentanyl. Let's get cozy for kind of a dark topic.
Tonight, we now know how long one of the drug dealers charged in the fentanyl overdose death that claimed the life of rising rapper Mac Miller will serve behind bars. Ryan Rivas in federal court said he was merely a middleman and had no idea the counterfeit oxycodone pills that he gave another dealer were laced with fentanyl. After Mac Miller's mother read a heart-wrenching statement in court, a judge sentenced Rivas to nearly 11 years in prison for the death. Mac Miller is, of course, one of thousands killed by fentanyl in recent years, and the numbers only continue to skyrocket. In fact, more than 100,000 died from the drug during the pandemic alone, and they are still counting the dead from that period. The victims are young, old, rich, and poor. This crisis is impacting communities across the country. Tonight, part one of a new ABC News Live series of reports that will run over the next few weeks. Our Bob Woodruff and team have fanned out across the country to see the crisis firsthand. His first stop in our series, Poisoned, is Nashville, where he learns what makes this drug so powerful.
ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more...
Dude, this is so like... Anytime you laugh when something like this is playing, it's like, dude, not cool, not cool, shouldn't be laughing, but just the way that I kind of like skipped over the family testimonies, I don't know, dude. I feel bad for them. It's horrible. We got a lot of stuff to get through. I'm such an asshole. Okay, moving on. It's just there to make us sad, you know, to spend like 5 minutes like getting sad over a stranger, like, people are dying, it's so sad. Like, it is sad. Let's move on. Okay. So now we got 7.5 minutes on A City in Crisis, how fentanyl devastated San Francisco. Let's go.
San Francisco is one of the richest cities in the world. But below its gleaming buildings lies a humanitarian disaster.
We have had, more overdose deaths in 1 year than we did of COVID deaths in our city.
Every day, on average, 2 people die from a drugs overdose here. In December, Mayor London Breed called for a state of emergency in a notorious district called the Tenderloin.
Bow, bow! Get me off camera!
We've been told it's simply too dangerous to bring our cameras here, so we are filming on our phones.
Black market.
Artie works for a charity called Urban Alchemy.
There is a lot of open drug use. I mean, it just happened literally right now, right here.
Urban Alchemy aims to get drug dealers off the street and helps addicts find a way to drug services.
Good morning, good morning. You okay? We about to come through and clean up, okay? Who all want coffee? Let's go. How you doing, brother?
We immediately came across a street with so many people doing fentanyl.
All right, so it's an interesting decision for me to tell you guys about this, but I came up with a very like crude, bizarre joke yesterday. It's based off of like the current year and society's fascination with like transgenders, how everything's about boasting up transgender people. I'm not trying to say anything offensive about it, but I think about like the 90s, like, like a tranny hooker in the 90s. That's definitely something that already existed. So I imagine the skit where like some like far left kind of person goes back in time to the 90s, and then they go find some like street tranny hooker, and they're like, "You're so brave. You're so ahead of the curve. You're so brave. You're such a good person. What's it like with your struggle? Like, you don't even know how oppressed you are, and you don't even understand how important you're going to be in the future." And then the tranny hooker is like, "I'll give you a hand job for $3 if I can huff some of the gas out of your car tank." Because I'm pretty sure, like, before the current year politics, like, you think about, like, a tranny hooker in the 90s or the 80s. Like, that was definitely a thing. Like, what did people think about them in, like, the 80s? And then, like, "Hey, sweetie, come here. I'll make you feel good for $5. What are you holding? You got any crank? You got any oil? You got any lighter fluid?" Anyway, I'm sorry for that. That's a thought that I had last night, and I wanted to share that with you. Back to being serious.
It was hard to get by.
Could I ask what you're smoking, sir?
Fentanyl.
Fentanyl.
Like, you don't understand. You're so powerful. You're so brave. Look, if you got $3, I know this place that sells glue, the good kind. We can get high and I'll toss you salad. It's like, no, I'm trying to say that you're brave. Just $2.
The local drug dealers had delivered the fentanyl about half an hour before we arrived. Some were openly taking it on the street, seemingly unworried about the police.
There you go. There you go.
Seeing this firsthand is pretty shocking.
He trying to make it up. There you go. Got it, bro? You got it, bro?
Fentanyl was developed as a pain medication. Its use as a recreational drug, though, has exploded due to its low cost. It's 100 times stronger than morphine, and even a tiny quantity.
This is what's ended up happening today. Is I keep finding myself laughing, and we're watching something like so depressing, and it's like, dude, no, it's not the time to laugh. But now I just talked about something funny, and then we immediately transitioned back into this, which is really sad. Time to hurry up and stop laughing. Holy shit. Okay, serious face. Whew, people dying. Not good. Bad.
Can kill.
Yeah, this is like this every day. And you think it's people.
There's evidence of drug use everywhere.
There go one that's been used, 2, 3. These are pulled out of needles.
As we were filming, a woman approached us.
Do you guys know where we can get any free tents at around here?
Free tents?
Beth and her partner Jay have been in San Francisco for a year.
So are you doing fentanyl like today or?
Every day.
Every day, yeah.
Really? What's it like living here?
Lawless.
Yeah.
Completely lawless. This is anarchy.
In December, the Democrat mayor of San Francisco made a spectacular U-turn on previous progressive policies. She had advocated defunding the police. Now she was refunding them. More aggressive policies on law and order.
It is time for it to come to an end. And it comes to an end when we take the steps to be more aggressive with law enforcement and less tolerant of all the bullshit that has destroyed our city.
San Francisco is falling apart.
The right-wing media in the US has become obsessed with San Francisco.
The Tenderloin, I didn't think it would, but it's actually gotten worse.
The city is covered in filth and homeless encampments.
To many Republicans, the city is a sign of everything that's wrong with the left. A town ruined by liberal drug laws and a lax attitude to crime. And the figurehead for that is this man, Democrat Chesa Boudin, the elected district attorney for San Francisco.
Boudin is a Yale-educated public defender who has never prosecuted a case.
Fox News has mentioned your name more than 1,000 times in written content in the last year.
Well, it sounds like you're paying more attention to Fox News than I am, and my sympathies for that. We come together today because of our...
Chesa Boudin is a radical, part of a wave of liberal DAs that have been elected in cities across America. He's responsible for which crimes get prosecuted. His detractors say he simply doesn't prosecute enough and that he's soft on crime.
This is an issue we can't prosecute our way out of. The history of the war on drugs tells us that. We need real investments in housing, in treatment on demand, on mental health services, on harm reduction, and doubling down on a failed war on drugs is never going to solve those problems.
But London Breed argues that the city's compassion has been mistaken for weakness.
We have services. If you look at what we spend in San Francisco per resident compared to any other major city in this country, I bet there is no comparison. So we're making the investments. The investments alone are not going to combat the challenges that continue to exist in the city and especially in the Tenderloin.
These two politicians are the most important in the city, both Democrats, remember, and yet they simply don't agree on how to solve San Francisco's issues.
I was very surprised, frankly, to see London Breed publicly call for moving more than $100 million out of the police budget into other areas of the budget.
And while the politicians argue about how to tackle these problems, some worry that time is running out for their loved ones. Jackie's son, Corey, is living on the streets of San Francisco.
I know that he's overdosed before and been revived with Narcan, so just one little mistake.
Jackie hasn't seen or heard from Corey in 2 months. She's come to the Tenderloin to try to find him.
Those are dealers over there. I don't see them over there. Let's go this way. I'm looking for my son today. Have you happened to have seen him?
Look for me. You been out here for a while?
Yeah, he has been.
We're not having much luck, but then a glimmer of hope.
I'm looking for my son who's out here. His name's Corey.
That's Corey. I know Corey.
I know him.
Yeah, I know Corey very well. I see Corey all the time.
When's the last time you saw him?
Yesterday.
Did you see him yesterday? Was he here in San Francisco or was he in Oakland? He was here. Can you just tell him his mom's out here looking for him next time you see him?
Is everything okay?
Everything's okay. I just really miss him.
That might be him right there.
With the wheelchair?
No, it's dirt. Sorry.
Despite our best efforts, we simply can't find him.
Corey is not blameless. My son makes the choices that he does that got him into this position, and he'll be the first to tell you that, you know, he made this mistake. So while he has a part to do with it, I think the dealers, I think Chesa Boudin, I think Mayor London Breed, I think they all have a hand in it not going well.
San Francisco isn't short of good people trying to help. Back in the Tenderloin, Artie managed to find Jay and Beth a new tent.
That's why we do what we do.
They'll at least be able to sleep better tonight. But until someone comes up with a solution to the problems in the Tenderloin, it's likely to remain tough for them and thousands like them.
All right, you guys. Well, it's pretty bleak stuff out there. Consider yourself lucky if you haven't got wrapped up in this stuff. I mean, I go on and on about my struggles in life, but, you know, a lot of the people that I feel took a different path in life than I did, well, they ended up going down this road, and it's out there for so many people. So I understand that it's something that I won't really understand on a personal level. I've known some really intelligent men who have opiate addictions, and I pray that they don't fall into fentanyl because it seems like a real killer. What is fentanyl and why is it behind the deadly surge in U.S. drug overdose? A medical toxicologist explains. Buying drugs on the street is a game of Russian roulette. From Xanax to cocaine, drugs or counterfeit pills purchased in non-medical settings may contain life-threatening amounts of fentanyl. Physicians like me have seen a rise in unintentional fentanyl use from people buying prescription opioids and other drugs laced or adulterated with fentanyl. Heroin users in my community in Massachusetts came to realize that fentanyl had entered the drug supply when overdose numbers exploded. In 2016, my colleagues and I found that patients who came to the emergency department reporting a heroin overdose often only had fentanyl present in their drug test results. As the chief of medical toxicology at UMass Chan Medical School, I have studied fentanyl and its analogs for years. As fentanyl has become ubiquitous across the United States, it has transformed the illicit drug market and raised the risk of overdose. Fentanyl and its analogs. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that was originally developed as an analgesic or painkiller for surgery. It has a specific chemical structure with multiple areas that can be modified, often illicitly, to form related compounds with marked differences in potency. For example, carfentanil, a fentanyl analog formed by substituting one chemical group for another, is 100 times more potent than its parent structure. Another analog, acetylfentanyl, is approximately 3 times less potent than fentanyl, but has still led to clusters of overdoses in several states. Despite the number and diversity of its analogs, fentanyl itself continues to dominate the illicit opioid supply. Milligram per milligram, fentanyl is roughly 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. Lacing or replacing drugs with fentanyl. Drug dealers have used fentanyl analogs as an adulterant in illicit drug supplies since 1979, with fentanyl-related overdoses clustered in individual cities. The modern epidemic of fentanyl adulteration is far broader in its geographic distribution, production, and number of deaths. Overdose deaths roughly quadrupled, going from 8,050 in 1999 to 33,091 in 2015. And from May 2020 to April 2021, more than 100,000 Americans died from a drug overdose, with over 64% of these deaths due to synthetic opioids like fentanyl and its analogs. Illicitly manufactured fentanyl is internationally synthesized in China, Mexico, and India, then reported to the United States as powder or pressed pills. Additionally, the emergence of the dark web, an encrypted and anonymous corner of the internet that's a haven for criminal activity, has facilitated the sale of fentanyl and other opioids shipped through traditional delivery services, including the U.S. Postal Service. Fentanyl is both sold alone and often used as an adulterant because its high potency allows dealers to traffic smaller quantities but maintain the drug effects buyers expect. Manufacturers may also add bulking agents like flour or baking soda to fentanyl to increase supply without adding costs. As a result, it is much more profitable to cut a kilogram of fentanyl compared to a kilogram of heroin. Unfortunately, fentanyl's high potency also means that even just a small amount can prove deadly. If the end user isn't aware that the drug they bought has been adulterated, this could easily lead to an overdose. Preventing fentanyl deaths. As an emergency physician, I give fentanyl as an analgesic or painkiller to relieve severe pain. In an acute care setting, my colleagues and I choose fentanyl when patients need immediate pain relief or sedation, such as anesthesia for surgery. But even in the controlled conditions of a hospital, there is still a risk that using fentanyl can reduce breathing rates to dangerously low levels. The main cause of opioid overdose deaths. For those taking fentanyl in non-medical settings, there is no medical team available to monitor someone's breathing rate in real time to ensure their safety. One measure to prevent fentanyl overdose is distributing naloxone to bystanders. Naloxone can reverse an overdose as it occurs by blocking the effects of opioids. Another measure is increasing the availability of opioid agonists like methadone and buprenorphine that reduce opioid withdrawal symptoms and cravings, helping people stay in treatment and decrease illicit drug use. Despite the life-saving track records of these medications, their availability is limited by restrictions on where and how they can be used, and inadequate numbers of prescribers. Other strategies to prevent overdose deaths include lowering the entry barrier to addiction treatment, fentanyl test strips, supervised consumption sites, and even prescription diamorphine, heroin. Despite the evidence supporting these measures, however, local politics and funding priorities often limit whether communities are able to give them a try. Bold strategies are needed to interrupt the ever-increasing number of fentanyl-related deaths. All right. And what was our source here? UMass Chan Medical School. All right, guys. Well, we are most certainly ahead of schedule today. I think we're in line for about an hour and a half podcast. So we're going to go ahead and get to the section on the church fathers, and maybe we can even go spend a little extra time here today. The church fathers are more important to. They're the most important. They're the most talked about in Orthodox Christianity. At least that's certainly what I feel like I've seen in my experience. I'm like 80-90% confident that usually when you hear a theologian referencing the church fathers a lot in their faith and speaking of them as like they're very important and foundational to their beliefs, they're usually Orthodox Christians. So we got a couple of interesting perspectives here. What do we do with the early church fathers? If I'm guessing, I feel like this is some sort of a reformed perspective. I'm not really sure. We'll just see when we get into it. And then reading the church fathers helped me convert to Catholicism. So we got a couple of unique perspectives on the church fathers. Maybe we can end it up with something from Jay Dyer. Introduction to Orthodoxy. Well, we'll just pull something up if we want to, if we decide we want to spend some more time on this. But I'm going to go ahead and I'll read a couple of comments before we move on. Let's see. I think all of us probably know someone who got into stuff like this. Absolutely. If they're actually smart, they would be buying Fent. Yikes. Elephant tranquilizer. Sketty. I got to get, what's that movie with Will Ferrell? where he gets shot with the elephant tranquilizer gun. Old school. I got to get that on DVD, man. Definitely, if not someone in your family, then a family friend. Oh, yeah, it seems like most people know someone at this point who got into this stuff and probably passed away. 100 times more potent than morphine. Woo! It would take a 170-pound man shooting up a quarter gram of pure Fent to maybe die. The analogs are definitely the issue, are most likely more drug propaganda. Interesting. All right, let's learn about the Church Fathers.
This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Well, here's something I thought I'd never say. This Honeycrisp apple isn't very good. This is Wretched
I've had
Radio.
to say that a few times.
No.
It's really disappointing. It's when you get the really big ones that they're really good. Otherwise, they're usually just fine.
But this one is big. This is the size of your head, Joseph.
Yeah.
It's a good one, but
Not
here's
my head,
this
but
is
a
the
normal
mistake.
person's head.
You've got the head the size of a trash can like mine. I bought this at the Kroger. And I can say that to him because my skull is also the size of a dumpster. So it wasn't intended to hurt your feelings. And besides, you actually just admitted you've got a pretty big cranium going on there, Joey.
Yeah.
Lots of hair, too.
My wife knit a hat for, actually, yeah, the
3 sheep gave their lives for that?
What's the deal with apples? All right, let's get to it, gentlemen.
She knit a cap for a friend, and he had to measure his head, and he's like, yeah, it's 64 inches? It's like, no.
64
You
inches?
mean centimeters? No, it's. Oh yeah.
They just don't have the look. I know. And I'm not trying to be offensive. The other day, by the way, somebody tagged me on this. I said something about the people who have a tendency to brag about being gluten-free. That was not a condemnation. If you have an
awful clip so far, we're almost 2 minutes into it. It is like, oh, what about skulls and apples and gluten? It's like, dude, are you serious?
To be gluten-free. Actually, one of my kids, gluten, it was a Oh, I see. Okay, then. That's what I was talking about. And I'm not against all things organic. I sure am against the prices. I'm just telling you. They've just taken all the flavor right out of a Honeycrisp. I don't know how that can possibly happen. It's sort of like all of the food at Whole Foods. Do you know what the food at Whole Foods tastes like?
Bro, are you serious? Like, it's okay to go on rants on your show, but when you make a clip and you say it's about the Church Fathers, like, you think you would be talking about the topic by this time.
Mixed with some flour.
No butter. Okay, fine, it's good for them. But Christians should think about Tertullian. Well,
Oh, here we go.
I was wondering what Christians should think about Tertullian. Well, for the most part, he's lost his qualifications for being a minister. Wearing that shirt.
No.
Huh?
No, that's
Tertullian church father thing.
Ah, well, that's
after whom
different.
Tertullian Shavidian was named.
From what I've found, many Christians see him as an early church father and apologist, as well as the man who coined the word Trinity. However, I'm reading a textbook on early Christianity in Africa for one of my classes at a secular university. That's important. And what I've read about Tertullian troubles me. So I'm gonna summarize your question, Jimmy. What do we do with the early church fathers? How do we read their stuff? Because sometimes we will quote a great, wow, listen to what Tertullian said, and you go, wow, that's really profound. And then you can read 6 paragraphs later something that causes you to go, is he a heretic? So what do we do with the early church fathers? Well, first of all, some are better than others. Just because you happen to have the moniker early church father does not mean that you're as sound as everybody else. So we approach them with that knowledge. Furthermore, we need to remember the early church fathers. They were at the beginning of, the early church, hence the moniker. They were going through battles that tended to inform their perspective and their slant on much. They tended to write about the issues of the day. And so if they were dealing with something, they could have had a really heavy emphasis on that particular controversy. We need to remember that. Furthermore, there's a reason that a lot of controversies brewed in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. It was the early church. They were getting things worked out. We've got the internet. We've got resources that we've got resources that have resources where we can read about these things, and we hear the word Trinity and we go, oh yeah, we've got this all figured out. Well, they didn't have everything all figured out, and they grew. And so if you read, for instance, early Augustine or Augustine, depending on whether or not you live in Florida, versus the old stuff will determine whether you like him or not. Roman Catholics tend to like his early stuff. We Protestants tend to like his more mature, wiser, studied, later stuff. Why? Because he grew in his understanding of justification. So we approach the early church fathers understanding that they are a mixed bag, that they should be read with caution. We shouldn't read them with arrogance. They were brilliant men. I was just reading some Puritans this morning on the issue of Christian liberty. I was struggling. Wow, these guys is smart. So we're not smarter. We just happen to have a greater collection of wisdom over the ages because these battles have been fought. So read them carefully. And don't let anybody throw them all out, but don't let anybody at the same time tell you everything they said was good. You'll hear Eastern Orthodox. I'll bet Hank Hanegraaff these days quotes the early church fathers a lot. They are not our primary source of theological wisdom. The Bible is. Furthermore, when I read this, Jimmy, and you say that you're studying a book on Christianity in Northern Africa at a secular university, probably a secular textbook, you've got biases. And so the people who bring those to the textbooks, the article, the blogs, needs to be considered too. Was just watching John MacArthur at, get ready for this one, fellas, at an AM 980 KKMS More Spirited Talk Radio Faith Builder series. That's right. He was asked a bunch of questions.
He's definitely got a good radio voice. I might check this guy out some more. Wretched. Yeah, so this is a Protestant perspective on the Church Fathers, which is pretty much what people would expect. I myself haven't read an entirely impressive amount of Church Fathers. I read some of St. Cyril of Alexandria. Yeah, it's a lot to take on. Jay Dyer recommends reading Basil a lot. I'll probably take that on at some point. It sounds like Augustine is considered a church father. I've got a decent amount of the way through City of God. I'm actually maybe planning on reading his book on the Trinity.
I know it was. It was a little bit bittersweet for me to watch this. It was probably 12, 13 years ago, something like that. KKMS invited Dr. It's the cinder block bunker in the middle of a field in Eagan, Minnesota. It's the radio station. Gentlemen, all of us worked there once upon a time, if your memory goes back that far. And we invited, and when I say we, I think that I was the one who actually invited Dr. John MacArthur to come and do a Faith Builder event, to preach for a couple of days. In the meantime, well, for all intents and purposes, I got fired. So I wasn't actually at the event. So watching the Q&A 12, 13 years later was a little bit on the bittersweet. And I'm not bitter, by the way. I am certainly not bitter. Why? Because those...
Definitely thinks he goes off on tangents. I wonder if he's even going to get back to the topic at all.
Shooting Bible verses all over the place. Love that when you hear a teacher who is capable of hearing a subject and then just going bing, 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 bing. Dr. John MacArthur was doing that, and somebody asked him a question. It didn't stump him because clearly he had studied the ante-Nicene fathers, those early church fathers that were... Anti. What did I say? Anti?
Anti.
Well, for all I know, they weren't anti-Nicene, but these happen to be anti and before the Nicene Creed and Council. He was asked, who are your favorites? And he was like, wow, it's kind of been a while since I've been reading that stuff. I thought that was instructive. I really think, I hate to say this, because I expect that we're going to see so many of those guys in heaven. Not those who showed themselves to be heretics, but we're going to see the early church fathers in heaven. But we just have more consistent theologians writing these days, more edifying stuff, and probably in a language and at a level we can grasp. And so it didn't seem like he spends a whole lot of time using them as sermon resources, recommending his private reading time. And he mentioned a couple of them. I think Tertullian might have been one of them, and there was another one, I can't remember the fellow's name, where he was like, they're overall pretty good. John MacArthur. But I'm not bitter. Todd writes, Brian, there is you talked about good books. Sorry. I just had a little case of memory dyslexia. Somebody brought up a book. Somebody said it's called The Good Work or The Good Book or something like that. Apparently it's all the rage these days. Asked what I thought about it because the guy heard about it on the Glenn Beck show because the author was interviewed on the Glenn Beck show. And I thought, I don't need to do any research. If Glenn Beck likes it, I don't. This isn't that, though. You want to know about good books about being a man. Some young men have contacted us here, and I applaud them for this. They want to be men. That more would. They want to be men. And I said, well, can't really think of a ton of books. The best thing you can do is find yourself a godly man at your church, hopefully your dad, and godly men at the church, and hang with them. Zip it and learn and watch and ask a lot of questions and believe their answers. Compared to Scripture, of course. At any rate, Brian sent this in and said, The Masculine Mandate by Richard D. Phillips is good. And, of course, Thoughts for Young Men by J.C. Ryle. J.C. Ryle, I worked through that book with Jack, so I can commend that book also. It's a little, even though J.C. Ryle is, I think, one of the most accessible of, let's just call him a Puritan-like writer, died in 1900, Anglican, sound fellow. Very accessible, but for for a boy, 8, 10, 12 even, you might have to do a fair amount of kind of modernizing it a little bit and bringing it down off the top shelf where it happens to be sitting so that they can access it and actually get it. And furthermore, I hate to say it these days, sorry, Pop, but regarding the issue of sex and pornography specifically, J.C. Ryle didn't spend a lot of time, and these days we have to, sadly. This is Wretched Radio. Shout.
All right. Well, yeah, I feel like he didn't have too much to say about it. Just like, take him or leave him. Sometimes they're a mixed bag. They say pretty profound things sometimes, but then they're outdated other times. Seems like a pretty cut and dry Protestant perspective there. This is, again, something that I just feel like I haven't studied enough to have an opinion on. I still need to read the Church Fathers, and I'm finding it's very easy for me to just, listen to a Protestant guy talk and think, all right, well, his perspective sounds pretty good. And then I listen to an Orthodox guy talk and his perspective sounds pretty good too. These are big questions. They require a lot of thought and personal introspection. I feel like this is going to be more informative. Reading the Church Fathers helped me convert to Catholicism. So let's see what Mr. Dr. Scott Hahn has to say.
And by then, I was already beginning to sense that the water was getting hot. And my last semester, I remember having this experience. Okay, I've just interviewed. They're offering me a position as the associate pastor at Trinity Presbyterian. They're asking me to preach at least 45 minutes each Sunday, to lead at least one, preferably 2 Bible studies.
Catholics would have a heart attack. 45-minute homily.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you'd be run on a rail. The time that I spent in the library, my last semester, was spent reading the Church Fathers, because in my interview and conversation with the leaders of the church that was hiring me, I realized they knew Sproul, they knew all of my favorite theologians, and so I couldn't just get up and recycle material. And so I went to the Fathers for help to find new things that were really kind of ever ancient, ever new.
Now, were Protestants doing that in your circles at the time, going back to the early Church Fathers?
Not even
Why is
close.
that? Why is that? It seems like such an obvious move that if we want to know what Jesus meant, what the Scripture meant when it said this or that, these things we disagree on, what do the earliest Christians think about?
I mean, back then, we had church history, and so we were expected to read some of the primary sources, and I probably had read a few hundred, but you were almost always exposed to the material that, for example, in Augustine, where he sounds like a proto-Protestant.
Right.
And so free will, predestination, and other matters too. And so it's a selection that is based upon a Protestant principle of selectivity. And so we didn't think, I mean, besides, it's sort of like growing up by a creek and then suddenly encountering the ocean. I mean, the fathers, we're talking about tens of thousands of pages, and how do you begin to wrap your mind around that much? Besides Calvin and Luther, they read the fathers, so let's let it be filtered through them.
Okay.
And I think that's what we did, almost subconsciously by default. Some people read the fathers, but even there, I think it was a highly selective process.
Do you think that Catholics also fall into this trap of selecting just the bits that sound Catholic and presenting them while avoiding verses that seem to support elements of Protestantism? Or do you think, no, legitimately, if you read the fathers, you're going to see a Catholic church?
Well, I mean, that's a yes and no answer. On the one hand, yes. I think we always look for the sources that will reinforce what we already believe. But no, I mean, in this sense, that Newman's famous line, to go deep into history is to cease to be Protestant. To go into the early church fathers, I mean, you can't find a corridor or a hallway anywhere that is really and truly Protestant. It might not be about, adoring the Blessed Virgin or worshiping the Eucharist or invoking the saints, but you can't go that long without encountering that.
Yeah.
And when you encounter it, what's the most troublesome is not just that they're saying it, but they're not debating it.
Yes.
I mean, it's more assumed than asserted, and it's more universal than it is a local belief that eventually convinced everybody else. I mean, in a sense, that's the way Protestantism grew and why it becomes like 20, 30, 40,000 denominations, because, we were the Presbyterian Church in America, or the Southern Baptists, we're regional, we're local, or whatever. Whereas this was universal by the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. And so
that's an interesting point, what you said. Like, you can learn almost as much about what the church believed by what they didn't debate.
That's right.
I hadn't really thought of that before.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries that Marian devotion, Marian doctrine is in the hymns, it's in the prayers, it's in the homilies, but there's no debate. I mean, Jerome fights Helvidius, but I mean, the way he refutes Helvidius is by appealing to the universal belief that Mary was ever virgin and all that follows from it. So these things were disturbing, but I was really looking only for preaching material.
Yes.
And so the series that I was reading from were the Sunday sermons of the early church fathers, 4 or 5 volumes that I would sign out, read. And that's when I began to realize that they interpret the scripture better than we do, better than my favorite professors, preachers and teachers. That Augustine's line that the new is concealed in the old and the old is revealed in the new isn't just a truism. It was like exactly what they would do every single Sunday, and not just for a paragraph or two, for a couple of minutes. It usually shaped their sermons. And they were obviously reading not just their favorite passages from the New Testament, they were reading through the scriptures in a kind of lectionary style that I knew was applicable to the synagogue and the temple in ancient Israel, but it was not what we did.
Yes.
And so, I remember compiling in my own journal a series of parallels between Jesus and Moses that I picked up from Ambrose, where,
Hey, give us some of those, because there's people who are watching and they're completely unfamiliar that it could be any parallels. So what are they?
So an example of typology would be to compare Jesus in the New to Moses in the Old. So, God sends the Savior at long last to save his people, but as soon as the Savior is born, the Savior needed to be saved because of Herod's tyrannical decree that targeted baby Jesus and all of the Hebrew male children in Bethlehem. Well, Ambrose, and again, Augustine and others just showed that, well, that's not the first round. Round 1 was with Moses. God sent the deliverer to deliver his people, but the deliverer needed to be delivered because of the imperial decree of this tyrant named Pharaoh, who targeted not only the baby Moses, but all of the Hebrew male children. And so you see how God saves the Savior through a man named Joseph, but you also find Joseph in the Old Testament, where he, like Saint Joseph, is the son of Jacob. He's the great grandson of Abraham, and Joseph is in the line of Abraham for Matthew in chapter 1. But he's also described as righteous. He's also a dreamer, and he also took the Holy Family of Israel, the family of Israel, down to Egypt for safety, So these parallels were so obvious to the early church fathers. I had taken graduate seminars on Old Testament books and New, but there was never that kind of interpenetration of the Old and the New. And again, Ambrose is just getting started. So you see how the Holy Family comes out of Egypt. Jesus passes through the water of the Jordan, and he goes out into the desert to fast for 40 days. And then likewise, you go back and Moses leads Israel out of Egypt through the water of the Red Sea, where they go into the desert, and he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights, during which time Israel undergoes the temptations. Jesus passed the tests that Israel failed, but all 3 times, he didn't just quote the Old Testament. The devil does that in one of the instances. But he quotes from Deuteronomy 6 through 8. You go back and the Father showed me that that's precisely where Jesus, that's where Moses had explained to the Israelites, why did you fail? Because man doesn't live by bread alone.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and these parallels, and there were more. So that after fasting for 40 days, he gets the law on Mount Sinai. He gives it to the 12.
I just read that part of Deuteronomy yesterday. I'm reading Deuteronomy right now, and I wanted to hear him say it first, just to double check, just to make sure I didn't misunderstand anything. But yeah, Moses actually fasted, and I do believe it said for 40 days and 40 nights, just like Jesus did in the desert. So very interesting. He fasted before receiving the law on Mount Sinai.
12 tribes. And then after Jesus' 40-day fast and passing the tests, he gives the Sermon on the Mount. And he says, I've not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law and the prophets. And so Moses gives the law, but it's not enough. So he chooses from the 12 tribes, the 12 princes who will help him govern. Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount. It's the law of the new covenant, not abolishing, but fulfilling the old. The next thing he does is to choose the 12 disciples. Well, Moses found he needed more, so he appoints 70 other men, and he anoints them with the Spirit. Jesus says the harvest is plentiful, the laborers are few. So he appoints 70 other disciples and anoints them.
Wow.
And, Moses goes up the mountain to spend a time with, a day in prayer with the Lord. He takes Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu. Jesus goes up the mountain to spend a day in prayer. He takes Peter, James, and John. And the transfiguration occurs to Jesus just like it did to Moses.
It's crazy.
When his face is aglow, they're like, you've got to put on a veil. We
That's
can't even
right.
look in your countenance. And then on the Mount of Transfiguration, who should appear but Moses and Elijah? And that's the law and the prophets. Moses gave the law. Elijah was the greatest of Israel's prophets. They also happen to survive a 40-day fast like our Lord. But what they're talking about, Ambrose points out in Luke 9:31, is Jesus' departure, which was soon to take place in Jerusalem. Only the word for departure in the Greek is exodon. And so here is Jesus talking about a new Exodus to Moses, who's none other than Mr. Exodus himself. And so if they had bothered to compare notes, Ambrose points out, and Augustine too, where, Moses performed some signs, the first turning water into blood. The first of Jesus' signs is turning water into wine. Moses is also executing he's healing lepers. He's also, what are some of these other, he's opposed by the leaders and persecuted. And, and Jesus undergoes all of these parallel experiences. And then, of course, the Passover is the 10th sign. And Jesus, of course, is going to create a new Passover, which is what Ambrose fastened his congregation's attention to, because that's the Eucharist. That's the fulfillment of the old. That's where Jesus establishes
I can just
the new.
imagine you reading this, because of course the internet doesn't exist, right? You're just reading these books that may not have been very well read by other Protestant friends of yours. Are you sort of looking around being like, does anybody know about this?
Right. We had been debating my last year in seminary. We were all involved, my professor and a few of my classmates, in the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy. So we had a high view of Scripture. But there was a debate that was dividing all of these scholars and teachers and students. Dare we repeat the hermeneutic of the New Testament writers? In other words, can we possibly read the Old Testament the way that the New Testament writers did? Because they did it in a way that was reminiscent of the early church fathers, who were just simply imitating their example. But we never did it that way. And the vast majority of Protestant evangelical scholars, even the inerrantists, like Richard Longnecker would say, no, they had the Holy Spirit, they were apostles, they had a kind of interpretive license to, they could even misinterpret the scriptures, but come up with the right teachings anyway.
Yep.
Whereas the Minority Report was based upon Patrick Fairbairn and a small number of Protestants who said, of course, Paul didn't say, imitate me as I imitate Christ, except when it comes to interpreting the Old Testament. That's where I alone get to do what I do, And so just imitating Christ, who taught the scriptures this way, imitating Paul, who taught his congregations. I'm still absorbing this. I'm about 7 or 8 weeks into the study of the fathers. When I unpack the U-Haul, I have to preach my first sermon, and I'm going through the Gospels. And afterwards, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, people are in the back shaking my hand as they're leaving, saying, "Where did you come up with this?" Oh, through serious personal research and study, a lot of intellectual initiative. You know, I should have been using quotation marks behind the pulpit the whole time because, you know, I was plundering the patristic sources. And after a few months, I began to let them in on that and invite them to read it with me. And a number of them began going down a trail which we wouldn't know exactly where it would lead. But in less than 2 years, I had studied and prayed myself into a crisis of faith because I also discovered, besides these ancient fathers from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, but Danielou and de Lubac both were Catholic cardinals, you know, and then also Congar and, you know, a number of, especially this guy named Ratzinger. I found in them the same way of doing theology biblically that you found in the early church fathers.
Okay, so you're reading Ratzinger.
Thank you for watching this clip. You can click here.
All right. Well, that also didn't go incredibly deep on the church fathers, but I enjoyed it. I love how you and Catholic Answers do this certain tactic for your videos, the full interview video, and then have great short clips that address specific topics. Let's go. Well, I wouldn't be opposed to ending the stream right here, but I did want to see if somebody made church fathers ranked. That would be very interesting if somebody made that. Who the church father Protestants fear most? The church father Protestants fear most. 17 minutes, huh? Were the church fathers all synergists? Where to start with reading the church fathers? You know, church fathers, who the church father Protestants fear most. That sounds interesting. 17 minutes. That would really beef up the show. We must reject the early church fathers of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Oh man, all over the place here. Protestants should embrace this universal doctrine of the church fathers. The most ruthless church father and why it's important. All right. We're going to go ahead and get cracking on this. An extra 17 minutes. Hopefully it's interesting. The church father Protestants fear the most.
When I converted to Catholicism 20 years ago, I said that I wanted to be like the first Christians. I saw there were all these churches, all these denominations. I tried reading the Bible. I said, you know, I just want to be like the very first Christians. And so there was one particular church father that stood out to me in reading his writings that moved me towards joining the Catholic faith. And that's what I want to talk about today. So welcome to the Council of Trent podcast. I'm your host, Catholic Answers apologist and speaker, Trent Horn. Before we get to our church father today, I'm very excited to share with you. Just a reminder, if you want to support our podcast to help it grow, be sure to get the study series is 18 hours long. And this person would be St. Ignatius of Antioch. So St. Ignatius of Antioch was the bishop of Antioch, a city in what was then called Asia Minor, now would be modern-day Turkey. In Antioch, it was interesting, in the book of Acts, I believe it's Acts chapter 11, it says in the city of Antioch, that is where the followers of the way, the followers of Jesus Christ, were first called Christians. And I think that it's very poetic that Antioch is where believers were first called Christians. It's also the first...
So I believe St. Ignatius wrote against heresies, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote early apologetics against heresies. I believe that was about 100 AD or so.
Documented case of the church being referred to as the Catholic Church, Catholic being a Greek word, kata holos, according to the whole. All right, so why is St. Ignatius of Antioch so important? Well, when you read Protestant authors or apologists of Protestantism, they'll say that, you have the apostolic faith, the pure apostolic faith. This kind of also sounds like Mormonism a little bit sometimes, that you had the pure faith of the apostles. And as Christians, we should believe what the apostles believed. Seems like everybody agrees on that. But then, like how Mormons say the church eventually fell away and had to be restored, Protestants may not want to use this language, but they'll say that the church lost its way and accepted human doctrines, the traditions of men, instead of the teachings of the apostles. Actionable Catholic doctrines can be found before the 4th century. You read St. Cyprian of Carthage, for example. I was reading a Protestant apologist, William Webster, and he admits that at least by the time of the 3rd century of St. Cyprian, he'll say, well, the church had fallen away, that Christians believe that the Mass is a sacrifice that is offered, not just merely a memorial meal. And he'll say that the church has fallen away here in the 3rd century, but when you go back earlier, they didn't believe these things. So finding church fathers who cite Catholic doctrine is important because it shows the historical reality that the deposit of faith handed on by the apostles was preserved in the teachings of the bishops, is witnessed to in the writings of the church fathers. And so when you have later church fathers, some people say to me, why are you picking Ignatius of Antioch? Why not St. Jerome or St. Augustine or one of these other church fathers, St. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Athanasius? These are all wonderful.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a single Mormon around these parts. As open-minded as I've been lately, saying that my theology, I'm really just kind of allowing Catholic and Orthodox theology to battle it out, while still keeping an open mind to semi-Arian perspective and hearing out the Reformed view. I've never really considered ever being anywhere close to being a Mormon. I feel like their views are pretty out there.
But the reason I think Protestants are more comfortable with them is they actually pick, many of them, Protestants will say, they totally follow Augustine. There was, I think it was B.B. Warfield, is a Reformed author who basically agreed with Augustine's doctrine of grace, but not his doctrine of the church, for example. So they'll say that these later authors have embraced these faulty man-made traditions that have arisen over time. They're coming on the scene 200, 300, maybe 400 years after Christ. But when you have early church fathers who witness to distinctly Catholic doctrines, then it becomes much harder to say that these doctrines are merely the traditions of men and not actually what the apostles taught, because now we're getting a lot closer. So St. Ignatius of Antioch died somewhere around 107, maybe as late as 110, but he was active in the 1st century. His death is recorded in the early 2nd century. So that's only about 70 or 80 years after the death of Christ. He engaged in correspondence with St. Polycarp, who himself was a disciple of St. John. So St. Ignatius of Antioch belongs to what we call the apostolic church fathers. So you have the church fathers, then you have a subset of them who form this bridge between the patristic church, the early church, and the time of the apostles. And so we call them the apostolic fathers. And St. Ignatius of Antioch is one of the most famous. When you read what he writes, you find a version of Christianity that many Protestant scholars, especially more liberal Protestant scholars, are not comfortable with, because many of them had argued that the first form of Christianity was very democratic. It was a bunch of Christians studying scripture together. There wasn't a hierarchical church with an authoritative structure. It was more democratic, is what they would say, not hierarchical. But that completely contradicts what St. Ignatius of Antioch tells us. He says that an authentic Christian church, the Catholic Church, is known by its hierarchy. In St. Ignatius' letter to the Trallians, he says, "It is therefore necessary that, as you indeed do, so without the bishop you should do nothing, but should also be subject to the presbytery, or the elders." This is where we get the word priest comes from, the word for elder, presbyteroi. "As to the apostle of Jesus Christ, who is our hope, in whom if we live we shall at last be found. It is fitting also that the deacons, as being the ministers of the mysteries of Jesus Christ, should in every respect be pleasing to all." So in the New Testament, the offices of bishop, priest, and deacon are somewhat interchangeable. They can be used to describe different offices that people hold. But by the time you get to the early 2nd century, St. Ignatius is very clear that these three offices are distinct, and that you have Christian communities that might have many elders, but they have one bishop. He speaks to the bishop in a singular way, having authority to preside over Christians. So in his letter to the Magnesians, Ignatius says, "Do all things with a divine harmony, while your bishop presides in the place of God, and your presbyters in the place of the assembly of the apostles." So these are very lofty words here that speak of a doctrine like apostolic succession. Letter to the Philadelphians, he talks about how, "Take heed then to have but one Eucharist, for there is one flesh of our Lord Jesus Christ, and one cup to show forth the unity of his blood." So St. Ignatius is saying that there is one Eucharist. There might be a lot of people who are celebrating the Eucharist, but for it to be authentic, it has to be done in union with the bishop of the church where you're at. And it's important to make sure you have the right Eucharist, because there are heretics who have a false Eucharist. And St. Ignatius talks about these heretics in his letter to the Smyrnians. He says that heretics confess not the Eucharist to be the flesh of our Savior Jesus Christ, which suffered for our sins, and which the Father of his goodness raised up again. So you have a very strong witness to a bishop who would have God-given authority, this important authoritative hierarchical structure in the church, to the Eucharist being the real presence of Christ that heretics deny when they say that it's not Jesus' flesh and blood. So it's no wonder that during the Protestant Reformation and after, many Protestants cast doubt on the letters of Ignatius. I've never seen them do this to any other church father as a whole. They may dispute whether some writings of some fathers are authentic, but history has shown that there are different forms or variants or recensions, as they're called, of the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch. And so as Protestants and other scholars came to see that some of these letters are not authentic, they're forgeries, they're written in the 3rd or the 4th century, they used this fact to try to cast doubt on all of the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, saying that all of them were forged sometime in the 4th century, and these could not be the authentic witness of a early 2nd century Christian, because he's talking about distinctly Catholic ideas that didn't show up until centuries later when the church fell away. Now, of course, if the Catholic Church is the church Christ established, you would expect someone like St. Ignatius of Antioch, writing in the year 107, to witness to these distinctly Catholic doctrines. So you had people like John Calvin saying that when Catholics cite Ignatius, it's what they pretend as to Ignatius. It's not authentically the writings of St. Ignatius. Philip Schaff, who is a 19th century scholar, very critical of the Catholic Church, he said that the whole story of Ignatius is more legendary than real, and his writings are subject to grave suspicion of fraudulent interpolation. Schaff didn't say that they were all completely fraudulent. He left it up to the reader, but he wanted to cast doubt to say, well, we can't really be sure any of these writings are the writings of St. Ignatius of Antioch. Though scholarship has changed since then, and now this is a fringe view really held only today by Protestant fundamentalists. An example of this would be the website Bible.ca. This is a classic fundamentalist.
Yeah, graven images. That's kind of a tough one. You know, you can take that really far. You can take it all the way to we shouldn't have pictures and photographs and DVDs, TV show, Instagram, Facebook. Like, you can take it to that level. You could take it to where there shouldn't be icons in the church. It's a tough one, man. It's something good to think and ponder on, but I think as long as you're like not worshiping an idol, at least make 100% sure you're not doing that. As far as everything else, we seem to live in a world of graven images, and yeah, that might not be a good thing. It's hard to say.
Arguments against Catholicism. And here's their arguments against the letters of Ignatius. They say that, yes, there are some letters of Ignatius, the longer ones written in Greek, that are fraudulent. There's also another recension, shorter ones that are written in Syriac. We're talking about the middle recension. I'm not going to throw on too many terms. I don't want to confuse anyone. But there are a set of letters, the 7 letters of Ignatius, that today nearly all scholars admit are authentic. But that wasn't always the case in Christian history. In the 19th century, there was a lot of controversy about these letters. And so some fringe elements today preserve this controversy, like Bible.ca. So they write, "We feel that it is no coincidence that the first historical reference to the Church as the Catholic Church is contained within one of the 7 genuine Ignatius letters. We feel it is proof enough to reject all as forgeries. That the argument on this website, when you read the whole thing, is basically these letters sound so Catholic, they can't be legitimate, and they have to be forgeries. The website goes on to say, the power of the bishop in these letters is also absolute. These kinds of statements actually paved the way for papal infallibility. It also took the commands to baptize and serve the communion out of the hands of the common Christian and gave it as the sole authority to the bishop. This again is foreign to the New Testament, where there was no clergy or laity distinction. So this controversy continued into the late 19th century, but ironically, it was Protestant biblical scholars investigating the Ignatian letters that showed that these 7 in the middle recension are indeed authentic. This is a text from Yaroslav Pelikan, a world-renowned church historian. I believe he was Lutheran and then converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, but this is what he writes. It was Protestant historical scholarship that vindicated the authenticity of the 7 epistles. Theodore Zahn, an Orthodox Lutheran, published his defense in 1873, and from 1885 to 1889, Joseph Lightfoot, by then the Anglican Bishop of Durham, wrote the definitive analysis of the evidence together with a detailed history of the research into it. But there are still people today, and not just Protestants, who claim that the Ignatian letters are forgeries. Some atheists say that Ignatius's writings about how Jesus is truly man and truly God come from a later period of Christian theological development, and that you don't have these beliefs as early. And of course, you have people like Jehovah's Witnesses and others who will pounce on that to try to discredit Ignatius, who is another witness to the deity of Christ. In his letter to the Ephesians, he talks about how it should be always for an enduring and unchangeable glory, being united and elected through the true passion by the will of the Father and Jesus Christ, our God. Abundant happiness through Jesus Christ and his undefiled grace. So Ignatius here speaks about Jesus as Theos, as God. But how do they try to argue that the letters are forgeries? The most common argument I hear is that Ignatius wrote these letters while he was in custody and was being taken to Rome for execution. And so it's interesting here, actually. He writes these letters to a bunch of churches in Asia Minor, and he exhorts them, he admonishes them, things that they're not doing well. He advises them to follow their bishop. He makes these instructions to them. But when it comes to his letter to the Romans, he doesn't include any instructions there except for one: please don't try to rescue me from martyrdom. Now, some people have said, well, Ignatius doesn't reference the Bishop of Rome at that time. He references other people not by name. That must mean there was no Bishop of Rome, there was no Pope at this time. But in the letter to the Romans, Ignatius doesn't mention anyone else of note either, which makes sense because you wouldn't want that letter to be intercepted in Rome and reveal where Christian leaders were in the heart of the Roman Empire. But the argument goes that if Ignatius was kept in custody of Roman guards going through Asia Minor and taken to Rome, and he's writing letters, how is he able to send letters and have visitors who take these letters? Why would guards ever allow that? This seems like a story that was made up by later Christians and that this didn't actually happen. Except we do have evidence in ancient Rome that Christians were allowed to visit fellow Christians who were in prison. And this evidence comes from a pagan writer, Lucian of Samosata. So Lucian wrote a work called The Passing of Peregrinus. It was a satirical work about a con artist who claims to be Christian, joins the Christian church, gets a bunch of free meals, a bunch of accolades, and he cons everybody. But in doing this, Lucian indirectly testifies to the beliefs and behaviors of Christians. So he talks about when he had been imprisoned, the Christians, regarding the incident as a calamity, left nothing undone in the effort to rescue him then. As this was impossible, every other form of attention was shown him, not in any casual way, but with assiduity. And from the very break of day, aged widows and orphan children could be seen waiting near the prison, while their officials even slept inside with him after bribing the guards. Then elaborate meals were brought in, and sacred books of theirs were read aloud, and excellent Peregrinus, for he still went by that name, was called by them the new Socrates. So Peregrinus, also known as Proteus, has been imprisoned by the Romans, but Christians are able to visit him in prison, and some of them bribe the guards. St. Ignatius of Antioch talks about the Roman guards. He refers to them as the 10 leopards, or 10 panthers, or 10 leopards. that are accompanying him, and that often they dole out cruelty to him. But at the same time, the guards were often in charge of procuring food and other things to keep the prisoners alive, and they didn't always want to do that. So if Christians came and said, hey, we'll give this guy a bunch of meals so you don't have to buy food or procure food, they would allow that. So if Christians are able to visit other Christian prisoners to give them food, or they just bribe the guards, they give money to the guards so they can visit and exchange letters, that shows that it's completely plausible that St. Ignatius of Antioch wrote the letters that are attributed to him while he was in Roman custody before he was taken to Rome to eventually be martyred. So I hope that was helpful for you guys, and I would definitely recommend go and check out the writings of St. Ignatius of Antioch. They're a quick read, then they're a great window into the early Christian church, the early Catholic church, as St. Ignatius called it. You can read them for free at newadvent.com. This is also a commentary on Ignatius of Antioch and Polycarp of Smyrna that you might find to be helpful. It's written by Kenneth Howell, so it's just the Early Christian Fathers series commentary on Ignatius of Antioch, Polycarp.
All right. Whew. Boy, that was a mouthful. Ignatius was the second apostolic father I read after Clement. I fell in love right away and began to see the historical foundation of the church. I was baptized and confirmed this last Easter vigil. My patron saint confirmation name I chose was Saint Ignatius of Antioch. Such a great saint. Saint Ignatius was key in my conversion from Southern Baptist to Catholic. What do people say about that? He was the boy on Christ's lap during his discourse at Capharnaum. Christ told him future. He was one of the disciples. Right, and Mary was sinless. Yes, 100% Mary was sinless. That is a lie from the pit of hell. Mary, like all of us, was with sin, had other children, was not assumed into heaven, and is not a queen. Oh boy, here we go. So what man-made sect of demonic Protestantism do you belong to? Yeah, guys, I just try to approach these topics with respect. I find myself being less and less arrogant, less inclined to teach, and more inclined to study and learn. I just wanted to finish up this segment today by saying that I feel like I'm having a very Socratic approach to theology lately, where it's like Socrates would ask people to define things, define Christus Victor salvation, define penal substitutionary atonement, define what it means to be Orthodox versus Catholic versus Protestant. You get to a point where you have a very good idea of various aspects of various denominations of Christianity. Know the theology first, and then choose which one is most convincing to you. It should be a long process. There should be a lot of thought put into it. I feel like it's a difficult path, so keep your nose to the grind, and of course pray to God for insight and be patient. Approach it with long suffering. So thank you, friends, for watching today. We're just under 2 hours, a little bit shorter stream for you. I will be back tomorrow, same time, and we'll do it again. God bless you, friends.